I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International. Joining me is CJ Hero. Hello, CJ.
Good evening, Alma, and good evening to everyone watching the news tonight. Here are the headlines.
Prince Philip, the longest-serving royal consort in British history, and a constant presence at Queen Elizabeth II's side for decades, died Friday, aged 99.
President Joe Biden on Thursday branded U.S. gun violence an epidemic and an international embarrassment at a White House ceremony to unveil his first attempt at getting the problem under control.
The Brazilian Senate will open an inquiry into the government's handling of the coronavirus pandemic as President Jair Bolsonaro continues to resist lockdown measures, even with COVID-19 deaths at new records.
And you can now see a departed loved one or their old pictures move around from a still photo.
First to the United Kingdom, Prince Philip, husband of Queen Elizabeth II, has died. Philip was always committed to his role and was the longest-serving consort in British history. Prince Philip was a robust health for much of his long life, but was repeatedly admitted to hospital with various complaints as he advanced into his 90s. And in 2017, Buckingham Palace announced he would be retiring from his public duties. Prince Philip will be remembered for his no-nonsense approach, combined with his infamous and sometimes politically incorrect off-the-cuff remarks, but also for his unwavering devotion to duty and to his queen. Take a look.
He was a familiar face by the Queen's side, following in her footsteps for over 70 years. Ever since their marriage in 1947, Prince Philip accompanied his wife on tens of thousands of royal engagements. Born on the island of Corfu in 1921 as Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark, he had a turbulent upbringing and from age 10 was largely separated from his parents.
He had a very peripatetic childhood and moved around a lot. And I think that gave him an inner strength, which stood him in good stead for the rest of his life. But he didn't see a lot of his parents in his childhood and was brought up by a variety of relatives. And I think that really moulded him and made him very self-dependent and independent.
After serving in World War II, he gave up a much-loved career in the Royal Navy to marry Elizabeth, who, like him, was a great-great-grandchild of Queen Victoria. When Elizabeth came to the throne in 1952, she initially looked to him for advice. But as she found her feet, his role evolved.
Philip had to become less of a formal advisor, more, I think, of a family advisor, someone who would run the family and to take control of issues such as the education of their children, etc., which would enable the Queen to have more time.
He said in a rare interview that he carved out his royal role by trial and error. Conducting more than 22,000 solo engagements over the years, he gained a reputation for outspoken gaffes, a trait which would get him into trouble.
They were called gaffes, but I think most of them he was just trying to put people at their ease and break the ice, and sometimes people are very nervous when they meet members of the royal family. So he tried to make people laugh, and sometimes it came off, and sometimes some people were insulted by what he said, but most of the time I don't think he meant to offend anyone.
From 2011 onwards, Prince Philip was admitted to hospital with various ailments, and at the age of 96 stepped down from his public role. The Prince was many things: charismatic and cantankerous, amusing and offensive, a patron to numerous charities. But his first duty was always to his Queen, and the absence of Prince Philip from her side will be felt deeply.
In other news, Hong Kong on Friday confirmed it has requested AstraZeneca suspend delivery of its COVID-19 vaccine amid fears of severe side effects and concerns over its efficacy against the new variants of the coronavirus. On Friday, Hong Kong's health chief, Sophia Chan, said the city has asked AstraZeneca not to deliver as planned later this year. Hong Kong has already secured a good supply of vaccines for its 7.5 million residents. It has signed deals for 7.5 million shots each with BioNTech, Pfizer, and China's Sinovac, both of which have begun deliveries. Chan said Hong Kong was also keen to look at other vaccines that may have stronger results against newer strains of the virus. Earlier this week, David Huey, a leading public health expert and government advisor, called for Hong Kong to replace AstraZeneca with a new single-dose vaccine made by Johnson & Johnson. Densely populated Hong Kong was one of the first places to be hit by the coronavirus, but strict social distancing and universal mask wearing have helped keep infections to just over 11,000 with 205 deaths.
Australia joined a growing number of countries halting the use of the AstraZeneca coronavirus vaccine for younger people over fears it can cause serious blood clots. In a further setback for Australia's already halting coronavirus vaccine rollout, officials said the AstraZeneca shot should no longer be given to people under the age of 50 unless they had already received a first dose without any ill effects. Prime Minister Scott Morrison held an evening press conference to announce the decision shortly after the government's medical advisory board decided to follow European and other countries in limiting the use of AstraZeneca. Take a look.
These matters was understood and supported, and I want to stress again that the advice that has been received, the recommendations that have been received from the Australian Technical Advisory Group on immunisation is not a ban on the AstraZeneca vaccine. It is not a prohibition on the AstraZeneca vaccine. It recommends and notes that the risk of these side effects are remote. They are very rare. We're talking in the vicinity of 5 to 6 per million, which is a rather rare event. But it must be acknowledged. And it's important so Australians can make informed decisions about their vaccination and their health care. Now, this is particularly important because we're substantively talking here about people who are over the age of 50. And as Professor Murphy reminded us today, that includes many health workers.
Australian officials justify the cutoff age of 50 for giving the vaccine by saying younger people were less at risk of suffering severe complications from COVID-19. But they stress that older Australians should continue to trust the AstraZeneca shots. There has so far been only one case of blood clotting in a patient who received the AstraZeneca vaccine in Australia.
Meanwhile, the Brazilian Senate will open an inquiry into the government's handling of the coronavirus pandemic as President Jair Bolsonaro continues to resist lockdown measures, even with COVID-19 deaths at new records. Watch this.
A gente está percebendo muito elevado percentual de internações em pessoas abaixo de 60 anos, tá? Depois de um ano é muito difícil, né? Você não ter uma equipe que esteja, né, sobrecarregada, que não esteja abalada psicologicamente, porque os eventos adversos eles são muito intensos e a sobrecarga de trabalho é muito grande.
Tememos muito que se forme um novo patamar de 4 mil, de 5 mil mortes por dia durante o inverno brasileiro, se não forem tomadas as medidas adequadas.
O lockdown nacional não vai ter lockdown nacional.
A judge from the country's Supreme Court on Thursday ordered the Senate to create a commission for the inquiry after requests from 32 of Brazil's 81 senators. The president of the Senate, Rodrigo Pacheco, finally conceded to their demands at a press conference minutes after the judge's ruling, after having opposed the move previously. Far-right leader Bolsonaro has defied expert advice on containing the pandemic, even as cases and deaths in Brazil soar, criticizing face masks and vaccines while doubling down on his opposition to lockdown measures as recently as Wednesday. In January, dozens of people died in Manaus, the state's capital, when hospitals ran out of oxygen to treat COVID-19 patients. In another blow to Bolsonaro, the Supreme Court also ruled Thursday that regional authorities can prohibit in-person religious services, something he had strongly opposed. On Thursday, Brazil recorded over 4,200 coronavirus deaths in 24 hours, bringing its total toll to more than 345,000, the second highest in the world after the United States.
France on Friday said under 55s who received a first injection of the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine should be given a second jab from a different producer. But the WHO warned there was not sufficient data to recommend that practice. Now, France's National Health Authority has last month said the AstraZeneca vaccine should only be given to those aged 55 and over because of reports of potentially deadly blood clots in a very small number of younger people vaccinated. Now, officials in France initially said that those given the AstraZeneca jab in a first dose should go ahead with a second jab, even if aged under 55. But in a ruling affecting over 500,000 people, it has said that those aged under 55 who had been given the AstraZeneca as their first dose would now get the Pfizer, BioNTech, or Moderna vaccine as their second jab. The World Health Organization, or WHO, which has recommended the same product be used for both doses, said Friday there was no adequate data on switching COVID-19 vaccines between doses. Several clinical trials are looking at the efficacy of combining two types of vaccines.
Vaccination centers in parts of India, including Mumbai, turned people away, and large parts of the country reportedly run low on doses, just as infections rise at their fastest rate since the pandemic began. The nation of 1.3 billion is confronting a ferocious second wave that has triggered its fastest infection rate since the pandemic began, with nearly 132,000 cases recorded in just the past 24 hours. Watch this.
वॅक्सिन घ्यायला आल्या पण इथं नाही बोलते मी परत घरी चालले उद्या परत येते
अभी ये केसेस जो बढ़ रहे हैं वैक्सीन देना चाहिए जल्दी से जल्दी उनका बंदोबस्त करके देना चाहिए ये चिंता का विषय है
And with just over 100 days until the postponed Tokyo Olympics, Japan's Prime Minister Suga Yoshihide imposed new restrictions in Tokyo, Kyoto, and Hyogo to contain the virus spread. Take a look.
地域においては新規感染者数が増加していること、医療提供体制の逼迫が懸念されることなどを踏まえて決定をいたします。今後も各地で発生する波を全国規模の大きな波にしないために、地域を絞った重点措置を機動的、集中的に講じて感染を抑え込んでまいります。感染力の強い変異株については、大阪、兵庫では感染者の7割前後を占め、東京においては約2割まで高まっており、最大限の警戒を続けてまいります。
Japan's government approved tighter coronavirus measures for the capital and other areas on Friday, weeks after lifting a state of emergency, and with just over 100 days until the postponed Tokyo Olympics. The new restrictions are far less severe than the blanket lockdowns seen in other countries and mainly call for restaurants and bars to close at 8 p.m. with the threat of fines for those that do not. They're already in force in virus hotspots, including Osaka City, where a rebound in cases has forced the Olympic torch relay off public roads. The pandemic-delayed 2020 Games are due to open on July 23rd in Tokyo, but a surge in cases in parts of the country is creating new concern. Kyoto City and areas of Okinawa covered by the new measures are usually flooded with visitors during the Golden Week holiday period from late April to early May. The new restrictions will last until May 5 in the two regions. Japan's government imposed a virus state of emergency across several regions starting in January, lifting it gradually, with Tokyo exiting the measure last. But cases have rebounded quickly in some areas where the measure was lifted sooner, particularly in Osaka. Japan has avoided the severe COVID-19 outbreak seen elsewhere and has suffered around 9,300 deaths overall. But its vaccine rollout is moving slowly, with only the Pfizer-BioNTech jab approved so far, and physicians have reported the spread of more contagious variants. Vaccinations for the elderly are planned to start next week, with approvals for the Moderna and AstraZeneca Oxford shots not expected before May. The new measures will be in place from Monday until May 11 in the capital and could affect the torch relay further.
President Joe Biden on Thursday branded U.S. gun violence as an epidemic and an international embarrassment at a White House ceremony to unveil his first attempt at getting the problem under control. Watch this.
Today, I'm announcing several initial steps my administration is taking to curb this epidemic of gun violence. Much more need be done, but the first, want to rein in the proliferation of so-called ghost guns. These are guns that are homemade, built from a kit, that include directions on how to finish the firearm. You can go buy the kit. They have no serial numbers, so when they show up at a crime scene, they can't be traced. And the buyers aren't required to pass a background check to buy the kit, to make the gun. You know, I want to see these kits treated as firearms under the Gun Control Act, which is going to require that the seller and manufacturers make the key parts with serial numbers and run background checks on the buyers when they walk in to buy that package. The second action we're going to take, back in the year 2000, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms released a report on its investigations of firearms trafficking in America. The report was of pivotal value. It was an important tool for policymakers when I was in the Senate and beyond, at all levels, to stop firearms from being illegally diverted into dangerous hands. Today, with online sales and ghost guns, times and trafficking methods have changed, and we have to adjust. We also have to ask the Justice Department to release a new annual report. This report will better help policymakers address firearms trafficking as it is today, not what it was yesterday. The third change, we want to treat pistols modified with stabilizing braces with the seriousness they deserve. A stabilizing brace hook on a pencil essentially makes that pistol a hell of a lot more accurate than a mini rifle. As a result, it's more lethal, effectively turning it into a short-barreled rifle. That's what the alleged shooter in Boulder appears to have done. I want to be clear that these modifications to firearms that make them more lethal should be subject to the National Firearms Act. The National Firearms Act requires that a potential owner pay a $200 fee and submit their name and other identifying information to the Justice Department, just as they would if they went out and purchased a silencer for a gun. Fourthly, during my campaign for president, I wanted to make it easier for states to adopt extreme risk protection order laws. They're also called red flag laws, which everybody in this lawn knows, but many people listening do not know. These laws allow a police or family member to petition a court in their jurisdiction and say, I want you to temporarily remove from the following people any firearm they may possess because they're a danger in a crisis. They're presenting a danger to themselves and to others. And the court makes a ruling. To put this in perspective, more than half of all suicides, for example, involve the use of a firearm. But when a gun's not available, an attempt at suicide, the death rate drops precipitously. States that have red flag laws have seen the reduction in the number of suicides in their states.
Despite Biden's appeal, there is ferocious opposition to banning powerful weapons like the AR-15, a semi-automatic resembling the U.S. military M16 rifle. It has become notorious as both the tool of choice in many mass shootings and a hugely popular item for sports shooters and legal gun enthusiasts. Biden successfully backed an assault weapons ban in 1994 when he was a senator. The law expired a decade later, however, and has never been renewed, with Republicans increasingly rigid in opposing what they depict as an attack on more than 2 centuries-old constitutional rights to bear arms.
Now, several hours after President Biden's announcement, a gunman opened fire at a Texas cabinetry plant where he was employed, killing 1 person and sending 4 others to the hospital in critical condition. No motivation was immediately known. Now, several of those wounded are in a critical condition, and officials said the suspect had shot and injured 1 officer. Larry Bolin, 27, was named as the main suspect in the shooting and charged with murder, according to a tweet by the police department in the East Texas town of Bryan, where the attack took place. Police Chief Eric Busk said Bolin was an employee of the cabinetry manufacturer where the shooting took place. The Bryan Police Department confirmed a total of 7 victims, which also included 1 person with a minor injury and another with a separate medical issue related to the incident. The incident follows recent mass shootings in Colorado, Georgia, and California. Nearly 40,000 people in the U.S. die each year from guns, more than half of those being suicides. President Biden on Thursday announced 6 executive measures, which he said would help stem the gun violence crisis. But Republicans immediately attacked the proposal, with the party's senior leader in the House of Representatives, Kevin McCarthy, warning of unconstitutional overreach.
A respiratory doctor testified Thursday that George Floyd died from a lack of oxygen, and a police officer, Derek Chauvin's knee was on his neck almost the whole time he was face down with his hands cuffed behind his back. Martin Tobin, a pulmonologist, told the jury at Chauvin's murder and manslaughter trial that he had watched videos of Floyd's May 25, 2020 arrest hundreds of times. Watch this.
Yes, Mr. Floyd died from a low level of oxygen, and this caused damage to his brain that we see, and it also caused a PEA arrhythmia that caused his heart to stop. That and the main forces that are going to lead to the shallow breath are going to be that he's turned prone on the street, that he has the handcuffs in place combined with the street, and then that he has a knee on his neck, and then that he has a knee on his back and on his side. All of these 4 forces are ultimately going to result in the low tidal volume, which gives you the shallow breaths that we saw here.
Now, I think you explained to us that if somebody is suffering from a fentanyl overdose, you would see a depression in the respiratory system.
Yes.
And depression means some reduction in the rate or ability to breathe.
Correct.
Did you see any depression in Mr. Floyd's ability to breathe whatsoever before he went unconscious?
No, absolutely not. It was normal respiratory rate.
Any evidence then that any fentanyl in his system depressed his breathing in any way whatsoever?
No. When he last take a breath, the knee remains on the neck for another 3 minutes and 27 seconds after he takes his last breath. the knee remains. After there's no pulse, the knee remains on the neck for another 2 minutes and 44 seconds after the officers have found themselves there's no pulse. What we're seeing is that half of his body weight plus half his gear weight is coming down. That's 91.5 pounds is coming down directly on Mr. Floyd's neck.
Is that all we see?
And the reason we're seeing that is because the toe is off the ground and there is no body weight sitting back. He's not hunkering back on his heels.
Eric Nelson, Chauvin's defense attorney, has suggested that Chauvin's body weight was actually on Floyd's shoulder or back at times and not on his neck. Chauvin disagreed and said that even after Floyd had stopped breathing, Chauvin continued to pin him down on the street. Several police officers have testified that excessive force was used on Floyd, who was being arrested for illegally passing a counterfeit $20 bill in a store. Police Chief Medaria Arredondo said Chauvin violated the department's training policies and its values.
In other news, a new cyclone was barreling toward Indonesia and threatened to spark more floods and landslides. Authorities warned on Friday as the archipelago reeled from a storm that killed more than 200 people, including victims in neighboring East Timor. Take a look. Death was said to dump torrential rains on South Sumatra and other parts of the country, including Central Java and Holiday Island, Bali. Well, the new storm was not expected to be as destructive as Cyclone Seroha, which pounded eastern Indonesia this week. The National Weather Agency said it had the potential to do serious damage. Cyclone Seroha, one of the most powerful storms to hit the region in years, turned small communities into wastelands of mud and uprooted trees, sending thousands fleeing to shelters amid widespread blackouts. The threat of a new storm came as President Joko Widodo arrived in hard-hit Lembata Island on Friday. His visit came as the death toll from the floods and landslide disaster rose again. At least 165 people have been listed as dead in Indonesia. Another 42 were killed in East Timor, a nation of 1.3 million sandwiched between Indonesia and Australia that is officially known as Timor-Leste. More than 50 people are still missing in the two Southeast Asian nations, and disaster agency officials are still searching mountains of debris for bodies. With thousands of filling evacuation centers, authorities were scrambling to avoid the spread of COVID-19 and treat children affected by the disaster.
In other news, Britain on Friday renewed appeals for calm after police in Northern Ireland faced another barrage of petrol bombs and rocks overnight in an ongoing week of violence. The worst unrest of recent years in the UK-ruled province has mainly stemmed from its unionist community, angry over apparent economic dislocation due to Brexit and existing tensions with pro-Irish nationalist communities. Watch this.
It is a mercy that no one has lost their life as a result of this appalling violence, and I would appeal again for everyone with influence in our community to use it to end this. The scenes over the last week have been as depressing as they are disgraceful. Whilst not all of those involved are young, it has been particularly disturbing to see another generation of young people, of children, some as young as 12 or 13, involved in violent confrontation with the police.
The scenes we have seen over this last evening and in previous evenings in various parts of Northern Ireland are totally unacceptable. There can be no place in our society for violence or the threat of violence, and it must stop. Just as it was wrong in the past and was never justified, so it is wrong now and cannot be justified.
Well, we are deeply concerned by the violence in Northern Ireland, and we join the British, the Irish, and the Northern Irish leaders in their calls for calm agreements. As the United Kingdom and the EU implement Brexit-related provisions, this administration encourages them to prioritize political and economic stability in Northern Ireland. As I said before, President Biden has been unequivocal in his support for the Belfast and Good Friday Agreement.
Night saw riot police on the nationalist side of divided Belfast belted with projectiles as they tried to prevent a crowd moving towards pro-UK unionists. Until a landmark peace deal in 1998, Northern Ireland endured 30 years of sectarian conflict that killed 3,500 people. The accord let unionists and nationalists coexist by blurring the status of the region within the EU. But Britain's 2016 vote to quit the EU revived the need for border checks on trade, potentially undermining the 1998 pact.
China's foreign ministry said it is in friendly cooperation with the Philippines after the presence of Chinese vessels at a disputed reef off the Philippines intensified a diplomatic spat over the ships. Take a listen.
中国和菲律宾是友好近邻，两国友好合作远远大于海上分歧。中方一贯便将继续致力于同菲律宾通过友好协商妥处分歧，推进合作，增进互信，维护双边关系大局和海上和平稳定。当前南海局势总体稳定，中方同菲方就有关问题保持密切沟通。我们注意到，菲律宾总统杜特尔特日前表示，菲方将继续通过外交渠道和平解决有关问题。中方敦促美方尊重地区国家间妥处分歧、维护南海局势稳定的努力，停止搬弄是非、挑拨离间。
Philippine Defense Department spokesman Arsenio Andolong said Thursday it was keeping all our options open as the diplomatic row with Beijing grows over hundreds of Chinese vessels in the contested South China Sea. While President Duterte has appeared reluctant to confront China on the issue, one of his top aides warned that the boats could ignite unwanted hostilities. Many of the boats detected at Whitsun Reef on March 7 have since scattered across the Spratly Archipelago, which is also claimed in whole or in part by Brunei, Malaysia, Taiwan, and Vietnam.
The U.S. said it was increasingly concerned over Russian militarization along Ukraine's border as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky traveled to the eastern front line. Watch this.
The United States is increasingly concerned by recent escalating Russian aggressions in eastern Ukraine, including Russian troop movements on Ukraine's border. Russia now has more troops on the border with Ukraine than at any time since 2014. 5 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed this week alone. These are all deeply concerning signs.
Her comments came after the Ukrainian president visited the eastern front line, where fighting between the Ukrainian army and Russian-backed separatists has intensified in recent weeks. The long-running conflict in Ukraine's mainly Russian-speaking east has claimed more than 13,000 lives since 2014. German Chancellor Angela Merkel, in a phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin, asked him to scale down the troop reinforcements on the border to de-escalate tensions, her office said in a statement. Putin, meanwhile, drew attention to the provocative actions of Kyiv, which has recently been purposefully exacerbating the situation on the front line, according to the Kremlin. Fighting in the conflict, which erupted after Russia's annexation of Crimea from Ukraine in 2014, subsided in 2020 as a new ceasefire agreement took hold last July. but clashes, mainly involving artillery and a mortar fire, have picked up again since the start of the year, with both sides blaming each other. Ukrainian separatists are widely seen as having Russia's political and military backing, which Moscow denies.
And the news continues here in Eagle News. CJ and I will be back right after this break.
This portion is brought to you by Canriv Corporation, your ventilation and air conditioning specialist. Services offered: supply and installation of elevators, escalators, air conditioners, ventilators, jet towel, hand dryers, generators, access control system, factory automation, and modernization. For more info, please contact Ami Kanke at 0915-263-7198 or 0998-900-3224.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Susunod sa Kesaya-saya! Pangalawang linggo na ng lockdown sa Barangay Aguila. Kaya extended din ang problema ko nang makasira ako ng gamit sa bahay ng BFF ko. Si Bebeng at mami niya, hindi pa din makapag-adjust sa isa't isa. Lalo na si Kapitan, na sobrang homesick at gigil nang makauwi pero wala siyang masakyan. Kaya ano pang hinihintay ninyo? Abangan ng extended na katatawanan ngayong linggo dito sa Kesaya-saya!
Sumaya tayong lahat.
Kesaya-saya, tuwing linggo, alas 6:30 ng gabi, dito lang sa Net25.
Teka nga muna. Nasaan si Cap? Malapit na kayo ako. Malapit na kayo.
The United States on Thursday slapped sanctions on Myanmar State Gem Company, vowing to deprive the military junta of a key moneymaker as it violently suppresses democracy protests. The Treasury Department said it would block all assets and ban any transactions with the Myanmar Gems enterprise, which manages the mining and marketing of the country's jade and other gemstones. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the United States was determined, alongside allies, to restore democracy and promote accountability in the country formerly known as Burma. He said by imposing targeted sanctions on this entity, we are sending a clear signal to the military that the U.S. will keep increasing pressure on the regime's revenue streams until it ceases its violence, Blinken said in a statement. He said the U.S. would turn up the heat until the junta releases all those unjustly detained, lifts martial law and the nationwide state of emergency, removes telecommunications restrictions, and restores Burma to the path of democracy. The U.S. has already imposed targeted sanctions on leaders of the military who seized power on February 1, arresting civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi and launching a crackdown in which more than 500 people have died. The latest action stopped short of returning to a total U.S. ban on the sale of Myanmar's prized jade and rubies, as was placed when the military was last in power. The so-called Jade Act, which Congress lifted in 2016, was popular in Washington but faced criticism that it hurt small-scale miners and traders who were already suffering under military rule. The Treasury Department said in a statement, the new sanctions are not directed at the people of Burma. Days after the coup, the U.S. imposed sanctions on 3 gem companies, Myanmar Ruby Enterprise, Myanmar Imperial Jade Company, and Cancri Company.
Meanwhile, U.S. aircraft manufacturer Boeing said Friday it has recommended that 16 clients flying some of its 737 MAX models address a potential electrical issue, a new setback for its most popular plane. Boeing managed to get the 737 MAX back into the air in late 2020 after it was grounded for 20 months following 2 fatal crashes, and recently announced an order for 100 of the aircraft as the airline sector begins to recover from the coronavirus pandemic. The potential problem identified Friday requires verification that a sufficient ground path exists for a component of the electrical power system, a statement said. Boeing said it was working closely with the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, and would direct clients on how to resolve the issue. The MAX was grounded after 346 people died in 2 crashes, the 2018 Lion Air disaster in Indonesia and an Ethiopian Airlines crashing the following year. Investigators said a main cause of both crashes was a faulty flight handling system known as the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, or MCAS.
Tokyo 2020 President Seiko Hashimoto said Osaka will hold its segment of the torch relay inside a park, but no members of the public will be allowed to attend. Coronavirus infections have spiked recently in several parts of Japan, including Osaka, which has decided to bar the Olympic torch relay from public roads in the prefecture. Take a look.
大阪府内の聖火リレーについては、大阪府の要請に沿ってのっとって、両日ともに万博記念公園内で一般の観客を入れずに安全な環境を確保し、希望するすべてのランナーに走行いただけるよう準備を進めているところです。
A date has not yet been set for vaccinating the broader population, but the government is now considering giving Japanese athletes both shots by late June, Kyoto News Agency reported, citing unnamed government sources. Private broadcaster Nippon TV and other media also reported the plan, with some pointing out that the proposed timeline would mean healthy young athletes would finish their inoculations before some of Japan's elderly. Top government spokesman Katsunobu Kato said there was no fact in the claim that the government is studying such a plan, and the government has no intention of discussing it at this point. But he told reporters the government would be closely watching discussions on athletes' health issues. Among Olympic officials, the Tokyo Games organizers and host city Tokyo. Japan's government denied any such plan was being considered, but said it would be closely watching discussions about protecting athletes' health.
In other news, a former American professional football player killed 5 people, including a doctor and the doctor's wife, before dying by suicide. Police in the U.S. state of South Carolina confirmed Thursday. Authorities said at a press conference that former San Francisco 49ers cornerback Philip Adams fatally shot the 5 victims Wednesday in the city of Rock Hill. He then returned to his parents' house, where he killed himself early Thursday after a standoff with police. The 5 victims include a 70-year-old doctor, his 69-year-old wife, and 2 of their grandchildren aged 5 and 9, as well as a 38-year-old boiler technician who was killed while working outside their house. A sixth person, another technician working at the house, was hospitalized with serious gunshot wounds. Speaking to a local television channel, Adam's father, Alonzo, said he believed playing professional basketball had messed him up. Adam's professional career from 2010 to 2015 was marred by injuries, including concussions. In addition to the 49ers, he also played for the New England Patriots, the New York Jets, the Oakland Raiders, and the Atlanta Falcons. Eagle News, we'll be right back with more stories. Please don't go away.
Essential or non-essential, lugaw and other food has always been a vital part of our culture. Our food defines our heritage, connects communities, bridges differences, and unites us as a nation. We are celebrating Food Filipino Month this April that aims to promote and preserve local culinary and the role they play in Filipino culture and heritage.
When we are talking about the food itself, it's basically essential. And one major type of food is lugaw or arroz caldo. Kailangan balikan natin yung whys natin. And ano pa ba yung gusto mong marating? As long as you have that discipline. And number one, yung strategy. Importante kasi dito, diskarte ngayon.
Jam Melchor, the founder of the Philippine Culinary Heritage Movement, will share his thoughts on why we are commemorating the importance of Filipino cuisine and how it helps us create our identity as Filipinos in this episode of Open for Business.
Samahan sina Wedge Kujamat,
itong balitang panggising sa ulo ng mga balita.
Apple David,
Sa 60 katao ang isinugod sa ospital.
TV Publiko
Economic sabotage ang mga tiwaling negosyante.
at Cristel Fesalbon
Pagpresyo ng gulay, makakausap natin
para ihatid sa inyo ang mga kaganapan at pangyayari sa bansa at sa iba't ibang panig ng mundo. Mga napapanahong isyu ng bayan. May balitang sports, entertainment at iba pang kaalaman. Simula Lunes hanggang Biyernes, alas 5 ng umaga sa paborito nyong morning show, Pambansang Almusal, dito sa Net 25.
Pambansang Almusal.
It's swept fast, obeys commands, and doesn't leave unpleasant surprises on the floor. Meet the AlphaDog, a robotic response to two of China's burgeoning loves of pets and technology. The high-tech hound uses sensors and artificial intelligence technology to hear and see its environment and can even be taken for walks. Take a look.
因为它有了视觉能力和不同的传感器，它可以感知周围的环境比如说它可以去预测地面的摩擦力，去看看地面的高度，所以基于这些信息，它可以做一个最好的运动控制，来调整它的腿的高度，调整它的这个步频，来适应于当前这个环境。 我们现在正在探索，去帮助残障人士，特别是视力不好的人士，去更好的让他们生活。那比如说，机器狗有了视觉，有了听力，甚至有了这个对话能力以后，它可以很自然地跟残障人士进行交互，并且可以带着他们去去逛超市去坐公交车。
Well, you can now see a departed loved one or their old pictures move around from a still photo. Take a look. The app site is myheritage.com, lets you take a still photo of somebody, and the site's technology uses artificial intelligence and will show you how they would move with eyes blinking, and in some cases, you can get them to smile. The technology is called Deep Nostalgia, and it works on any photo. Moneycontrol.com says these apps allow you to trace your entire family history by cross-referencing a global information board. In other words, you willingly give them your information and they do their best to find every person you might be related to. Whether you want to give up your information is up to you. So tech lovers point out that there can be some major privacy issues.
Creepy. A three-man crew docked at the International Space Station Friday after a flight honoring the 60th anniversary of Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin becoming the first person in space.
Vertical towers. Really,
A
those two ground
capsule
structures
carrying
attached to the rocket
Roscosmos
itself.
cosmonauts Oleg
The taller
Novitsky
one's gonna separate
and
the
Pyotr
top
Duprov
5
and NASA
seconds
astronaut Mark Van de Hey docked at 11:05 GMT. The launch came just ahead of Monday's anniversary of Gagarin's historic flight on April 12, 1961. Reminders of his achievement were everywhere at the Russia-operated Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, as Novitsky, Dubrov, and Van de Hey prepared for their half-year mission aboard the orbital lab. The Soyuz MS-18 spacecraft that the trio took off in has been named after the legendary cosmonaut, and Gagarin's portrait has been added to its exterior. Last used in 2019, the launch pad is undergoing upgrades in preparation for a new generation of Soyuz rockets and expected to return to action in 2023. But the anniversary comes at a difficult time for Russia's space industry, which has suffered a number of setbacks recently, from industry corruption scandals to an aborted takeoff, scuppering a manned mission in 2018. And perhaps most importantly, Roscosmos and Baikonur last year lost their monopoly over manned ISS launches, as reusable rockets from Elon Musk's SpaceX delivered NASA astronauts to the station from American soil.
Oh, the obsession over who gets to explore space first still continues to this day.
Yes, indeed.
Well, that's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I am CJ Hero. Please join us again tomorrow.
And at the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. I'm Alma Angeles, and
we live in interesting times.
I think that gave him an inner strength which stood him in good stead for the rest of his life. But he didn't see a lot of his parents in his childhood and was brought up by a variety of relatives. And I think
former advisor, more of the...
And the taller one's going to separate in about 35 seconds before launch. And we see booster ignition.
Engines at maximum thrust.